Welcome to the Career Coffee Chat podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Urban, certified career strategist and executive coach, removing career roadblocks so you can achieve more impact, influence, and income.
Welcome to Career Coffee Chat Live. I'm your host, Aaron Urban. I'm a certified career strategist and executive coach, and what I do is I help driven, experienced professionals remove career roadblocks so you can achieve more impact, influence, and income. And speaking of impact, influence, and income, today I am extremely excited to have CEO and best-selling author Mandy Cavanaugh on the show to talk about how to break that glass ceiling and get to the top and stay there with her new book, F the Glass Ceiling. I love that. It's so irreverent and so funny. She's an extremely engaging individual. So I'm extremely excited to have her on the show today to talk to you about how to rise to leadership, stay there, and still be your authentic self. And interestingly, you might be aware that some of our habits and behaviors might be sabotaging us. Even our mindsets can sabotage us and our efforts to propel our career forward, rise to the top, and stay there. So if you're curious about what strings to pull and what matters and what doesn't, what actions you should take to be either a leader, elevate yourself in your profession, or even go the entrepreneurial route, this show is definitely for you. Now, for those of you who have never seen my smiling face before, my name is Aaron Urban, or Coachy Urban. You can find out more about me at coachyurban.com. And of course, my new book, Elevate Your Career for More Impact and Income, is available on Amazon and on Kindle as well, open source software. And if you love the show, feel free to share it with your network to spread the word, spread the good news and information to help other people grow and elevate their careers, not only in leadership, but in all aspects of their lives. So if you're interested to know more about Mandy, Mandy has passion for leadership, entrepreneurship, and helping people thrive, fuels her roles as a CEO, consultant, and facilitator. She helps teams succeed in dynamic and uncertain environments by connecting them to the best version of their future selves. You can find out more about her at mandycavanaugh.com. And without further ado, I am so thrilled to welcome to the show Mandy Cavanaugh. Great to see you. So thrilled to have you.
Thanks. It's an honor. Thank you.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit about what was your catalyst for being that best-selling author and publishing this outstanding book, slightly irrelevant, and it really gets to the point. I love it. F the Glass Ceiling. That's wonderful. It gets the point and gets your attention for sure. So, what was your catalyst for writing that book? What inspired you?
Well, I had been doing the CEO thing for about 15 years, and I also got a couple of coaching certifications to help with that. And I was hanging out with seminar leaders and workshop leaders. Those were my friends because we were trained in the same stuff, so we had a lot in common. And I was asked to be part of some consulting gigs and some coaching gigs and leading some workshops. And one of the workshop series was for female entrepreneurs. And they were for people who were more aspiring than, have already built a big business. So I didn't really know what to expect because I had never worked with people that maybe didn't have business training, but they were interested in being an entrepreneur. And so I organized the products around them, and it turned out really well, surprisingly. There was a lot of kind of, self-organizing and coming up with what we were going to do as it happened, and so I pulled from like business training, coaching training, experiences as a CEO, real life stories. And I found it really fascinating to see what they were most interested in. It's not necessarily what I would have predicted. And so I guess I felt like, this is creating a lot more value for people than I would have thought for feminine entrepreneurs, not just female, if that makes sense. There's kind of just because you're female doesn't mean you're super feminine, and vice versa. So these were really feminine individuals that had signed up for the conferences. And, my mentor who organized those conferences asked me, he said, he made a comment one time, you should write a book. So that planted the seed. And then one of the people who was in the classes said, I'll help you write it. And so she just interviewed me and we recorded the interviews, and that became the first draft.
That's outstanding. That's great. That's great.
But I never really looked at gender, as a business person. I was in a lot of male dominated environments, military, oil field, I guess, and things like that. But so it was fun to see. I started really recognizing what I bring to the table as a feminine entrepreneur more than, because I thought, I'm not the same as everyone else. Well, I started a little bit noticing patterns in what it means to be a feminine entrepreneur, and I started honoring that more. And I also started being able to dial down my masculine energy, which I had dialed way up to succeed. And it was at a cost, so being around all those women helped me let other parts of myself come out. So it was really a symbiotic. I feel like I got a lot more out of it so the book is kind of giving back, So it's saying, how to lead teams, how to organize your business around you, serving you. And it's because I read the research, and there's not really a glass ceiling anymore as much as there is a glass cliff. And it's not only for female, like high-powered corporate leaders, it's also a glass cliff for feminine entrepreneurs. So the statistics kind of support, let's figure out what feminine high performance is so that we can have a business organized around us and our strengths, rather than, treating it like kind of like a masculine leader would, which is typically relatively compartmentalized. And there's nothing wrong with it, obviously, but it just takes a little bit of a different perspective to make it work for you than maybe what business training and your typical CEO group organizes around. If you're into like executive trainings and things.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And what's interesting is, as leaders in any, regardless of gender, really latching hold to that very strong, historically dominant male energy doesn't necessarily make you a great leader. In fact, it does not. And what I'm finding as the research I do specifically around leadership and professional development, when we are not true to our authentic selves, number one, so we're not showing up in our strength zone, not showing up in our zone of genius, if you will. And we're also trying to emulate this very old pattern of this very dominant male energy, whether you are male or female. It does not produce good results. We'll put it that way. So what have you found around that? And what are your revelations when it comes to someone who wants to become more high performance in their careers and as a leader or as an entrepreneur? What do you find the commonalities, either those things that people need to focus on or the things that they need to, maybe stop doing?
So to be a female leader?
To be a high performance leader, either as a leader, high performance professional, or coming into leadership, or as an entrepreneur.
This is what worked for me, and it's to really play to my strengths. So it's not everybody has the same strengths, but I think that you and I, for example, are two relatively different personalities. I'm just picking up on, you might be more analytical than I am, for example. And so you might dig into the data more. I couldn't cite the data that I researched all this data to write the book, but I didn't hold it in my head. I used it to back up the facts or the observations that I was making. If I were more analytical, I might have done it differently. So how would that play out? If you came in and ran my company, you would run it a little bit differently. You would probably run, I can't speak for you, but somebody who's more analytical would run it more on metrics. They would run it more on pressure curves and seeing what all the, what does the data say, the freshness factor of the client base and client concentration, all that stuff. And it would probably still be a successful company, but you would need to have people that are less tied to the data and can kind of go out there and wing it, more blue sky, more innovative, perhaps, thinking out of the box. You would want to bring those people onto the team. In my business, at least, it's a high touch service business. I am more of the out of the box, blue sky, always looking for the next product line. And so I have to have people that are a little bit more data driven, or to the extent that the company is successful, means that we're looking at the numbers and making decisions based on the numbers. And so I guess for a leader, it's important to not try to ignore your weaknesses. And because especially for small to medium-sized businesses, whatever the main weakness of the owner is usually becomes the weakness of the business. So you've got to just be kind of conscious of that. So to me, it's about building the right team. And it's not about building a team according to some template or cookie cutter recipe that you learned in MBA school. And that's a feminine perspective to go ahead and acknowledge that you want a certain, personality. We use profiling tools. I'm a rainmaker profile. Our CEO is a trailblazer profile. This is in my primary business. And we put, specialists on the accounting team, things like that. So I think it's a feminine leadership trait to allow for people to do a job and have a weakness in an area and support them with a team player who overcomes that weakness, or who fills in the gap. Whereas in big corporations, you typically are all measured by the same thing, and not one is better than the other. There's just a little bit of a different way of doing it. And my book is about doing it your way, so that, especially if you're like me, where you have a very narrow band of strengths that are somewhat powerful, more concentrated, but narrow. That's typical of entrepreneurs, I think. You do see some jack of all trades, entrepreneurs that can do the finance, the manufacturing part, the operations and sales, but usually it's 2 out of 3. Anyway, that's what I would say, is to quit, pretending like you don't have blind spots, and find people that cover those blind spots for you. And then when you find yourself unhappy, unfocused, scattered, disheartened, dissatisfied, anything like that, just look and see, are you in your function? Are you doing that which lights you up? So, in my own primary company, I've been somewhat dissatisfied lately. And, if I'm following my own coaching, this has been going on for a while. If I'm following my own coaching, I would get out in front of clients. I would go and try to close some massive deal or something like that. So, but it's challenging because I'm trying to a little bit step away from that, that company, and not tinker around in it too much. But it would be like, so what I am doing is I am following my own coaching. We're opening a new product line. So, and that's just to keep me engaged. It's like we're opening a new product line. That's what I bring. I've got nothing else. So we're opening a whole new sector. So that's just an example.
Right. So it's interesting, the correlations between what you talk about and what I talk about also in my book is, uncovering the blind spots. How are you perceived by other people, and working in your strength zones as well is extremely important. A lot of people feel like they have to close all the gaps and be perfect in all things, and that's a huge waste of energy.
Yeah. For
one thing, embrace your strengths, embrace what you're good at, and leverage that as you grow in your profession, in your career as a leader, as a CEO, as an entrepreneur, whatever that looks like for you. So it's interesting, we were talking too before the show a little bit about conscious language and the words we choose. And I study a lot about neurolinguistics and neuroscience and the power of mind, the power of articulated words or articulated thought, and how that then shapes what we're allowing inside of our world, right? Inside of our environment, how much happiness, success, abundance, and joy that you actually allow in your life. And years ago, I read a book by Gay Hendricks called The Big Leap. And his theory was that we have what's called an upper limit switch. So we have this upper limit of how much success, happiness, joy, relationships, all these things that we will actually allow in our lives. Mm-hmm. And when we hit that limit, we self-sabotage. So I tested it. I was like, this is crazy. So I decided to test it because that's what I do. I test everything before I actually incorporated my coaching business and find out it's true. We do. We do have a limit, and we'll self-sabotage if we reach that self-imposed limit. And there's another way that's imposed upon us is through people in our lives, our parents, our parental structures, our familial systems, all those kinds of things. So what do you find and that conscious language choices that sometimes sabotages leaders as they move up or as they develop themselves.
I see that greatly in people not giving themselves permission to get to the next level or to get to a quantum level of improvement. They don't give themselves permission to be loved or to have connection on their teams.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just talk about like financial results. If you can't imagine, you can only imagine incremental improvements. Like you're organized by, let's try to grow our revenue by some single digit or 10% per year. And if you want to grow by by a multiple, then you've got to have that conversation. So let's just say I took 100, we take 100 people and we say, okay, everybody, and they're all business owners or leaders, corporate leaders. And you say, I want to stick to business owners because that's what I know. So I say, okay, I want you to write down 5 ideas on how to grow your business next year by 10%. Everybody would be finished and put their pencils down by, in a couple of minutes, because they all hold that in their head. That's kind of like the going program is how to get better. But if I said, I want you to add a 0 and go 10x, I want you to improve. I want you to grow your revenue by 10 times next year. After the groans, it's they might write down some crazy ideas, like, oh, well, I could just blah, blah, blah. But you can't just raise prices and grow that much. So, then in order for us to plant the seed as facilitators that they could, in fact, there is a potential timeline in which they could 10x their revenue. There is, right? If you're in business, they would have to change a little bit about like their nervous system around it. They would have to give themselves permission, take some deep breaths, envision it, and kind of receive in their imagination that 10x, income. Like if I, as a consultant, were only going to get paid if they actually pulled that off, that's what I would have them do. Because otherwise those ideas that they came up with, are just that. They're just ideas. They came from the level of mind that got them to where they are today. So to get to the level of mind of improving or increasing their income by a multiple, they're going to have to get aligned with it energetically first. Because when they walk out of that workshop, let's say they walk out, if they've energetically aligned to that new level, they'll see things they didn't see before. And the phone calls or the thing they read about in the news or a client that, it's just their radar, their awareness will open up. And if they're open to it, the synchronicities will start happening. And if you're really aligned with it and you can get a team aligned with that new possibility, you become a force of nature.
Yes, very true. You mentioned something before the show, and I loved how you put it, because when I coach people into, success mindsets and how to align with your goals and goal setting and the whole thing, one of the things you talk about is energetically aligning with that goal and also letting go of the how.
Yeah. And
can you share with us a little bit about why that's important?
Well, I got this from people like Dr. Joe Dispenza and my conscious language instructor, Bob Stevens, and other people like other mentors of mine, where when you're working in that field of energy and information, we call it the quantum field, or you're working in a field that is more complex than you can hold in your mind. If you worry about the how, you're going to kind of slow it down. So you're going to become sequential. You're going to say, okay, I've got to finish this and I can't do this other thing until I finish this. And you're just going to slow down your goals. So you could stretch it out, a goal that could happen instantaneously to take a year, 10 years, at some point you give up.
Right.
So part of not having an attachment to how things happen is not having an attachment to when.
Very powerful.
Because I find that people push their goals out farther than they need to. You would think it'd be the opposite, like, oh, I'm not giving myself enough time. Well, just kind of let that go and just imagine yourself. And this isn't like a cookie cutter, like if I just have a great imagination. I can imagine reaching that goal, and I let go of how it's definitely going to happen. There's a lot of complexity. You may have to reorganize some things in your life, your business, your friendship, your friend circle, your relationships, your fitness, your health, your ability to, perform when the opportunities come. But it's a first step. It's kind of like setting things into motion, and letting go of how is allowing for grace. It's allowing for synchronicity, and it's allowing for creativity. It's taking it out of the realm of the mind and putting it into the realm of, I don't know, playing.
Possibilities, really.
Yeah, it's playing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's interesting is because our mind, our knowledge, our experience is built on what we already know. If we are to expand and be a pioneer beyond that level, and letting go of the how we get to that level is important, because basically, as Marshall Goldsmith said, what got you here won't get you there. Right? In order to actually expand to that high performance level as a professional, as a leader, as an entrepreneur, we have to let go of the how, because how we've gotten here so far, that's what we know. We may need to expand beyond that. So being energetically aligned to the goal is important, so that we are actually opening up the mind to consider possibilities that we don't already know. I know it sounds a little weird, particularly for those of you that are tuning in. They're very analytical and really planners, right? We're planners. And I'm a planner. I'm a rampant planner. I've got planning disease. I started planning when I was born. That's what I do. And it's very interesting. It was several years ago, pre-pandemic, and I think most of you have now been through the pandemic and the uncertainty of the future, not really sure, okay, can I even plan? You're probably more familiar with what I'm about to describe, but I was in a point in my business and in my growth as a person, I couldn't really see the long-term plan. And I just had to have faith, if you will, that I had a goal, and I just needed to put one step in front of the other foot as the opportunities and knowledge came to me, that I would achieve it. And I did. But there was no clear path. Right?
Yeah. And that's leadership. Leadership is, we don't know how we're going to win this game, but you practice the fundamentals and then you just get out and you play.
Right.
I mean, that's an analogy that I have for what you're talking about. Like, we had to play in the world of, like, how are we going to, where's the new demand going to come from? If you lose one of your revenue streams during a pandemic, what just get curious, like, where are my services needed? And, it's not that easy. It's easier said than done, but it's definitely, doesn't do you any good to just get attached to a certain way of doing it, obviously. So
what are some of those things that you see, Mandy, that people who have a lot of potential, but they hamstring themselves for becoming high performance leaders, entrepreneurs, or experts in their field? What are those things that you see people do to sabotage?
The first thing that comes to mind is really judging and scapegoating and not communicating, what they need, or willing to be wrong. So a lot of high performance or high potential people would rather shut down around adversity when it comes to working with other people. They would rather shut down than sit down and have a heart to heart, and say, okay, I'm being thwarted. I feel thwarted. This is what I need to get done. And the other person has a chance to say their piece about why they're trying to get, their thing done. And as long as you have functioning personalities and a little bit of emotional intelligence, you can kind of get through it. But there's this, like, kind of a lack of vulnerability and a lack of authenticity among leaders who think they have to know everything all the time.
Yep.
So that's number one, is you don't have to know everything. You can bring passion and wisdom and know some things, but ask questions like, what's your version of reality? This is my version. Like, let's get together and talk about this. I want to have a heart to heart with you. Like, this is what I'm not getting that I need. And the other person can say you would be surprised what comes up. And it takes a lot of courage. And I learned this the hard way. It was like one of my biggest weaknesses, which is currently becoming a strength, I'm in the baby steps of it. But I see it rampant among managers and people who thrive on systems and people following procedures and policies. I see it less rampant in leaders. I see it more rampant in manager types.
Right.
So it's the willingness to ruminate on a problem and to kind of simmer and marinate in something that's bothering them rather than sit down with the person and say, I want to talk to you about this because I want to have a breakthrough,
Right.
Communication.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. You made a designation between management and leadership. And I was talking to one of my clients yesterday. It's like, well, you have a couple of choices in your career path. She's at the level of management now. So you can continue down management. Know that management doesn't come without leadership if you want to be effective. Or you can just do leadership, because you can do leadership without management, or you can become an expert, a technical expert. And there is a difference between management and leadership. You manage the metrics. Management's about, administrative functional management, but management can't come without leadership. And the leadership portion that some people have a hard time grasping a hold of is that ability to say, okay, I don't have all the answers, and I have to be comfortable with that, because particularly those people who are more analytical, those people who are more risk averse, I see that they struggle with not having all the answers. In fact, I'll lob a question at you from one of my executive coaching clients. She said, they want me to be the COO. She's skeptical, but she's like, they want me to be the COO. And how can I possibly do that role? How can I keep track of all the moving pieces? And that was a red flag right there. Of course, we had a conversation about that. But what does that bring up for you when you hear that? How can I possibly keep track? How can I keep track of everything?
I'm just going to be super blunt. The COO would be craving keeping track of all the moving parts. They would be so cocky that they knew they could take it on, whether they could or couldn't. I mean, if you say, how can I possibly, that's a vulnerable thing to say. And I appreciate that. Maybe she is the right fit, but you have to have nerves of steel to be a COO, right? So if she's having a lot of nervousness and anxiousness about it, maybe she's not quite ready yet. Maybe she could be a director, or maybe, I don't know. But to me, a COO is somebody that has the gumption and the spine and the willingness and the desire to control things in order, and they just can't wait to get their hands on that level of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
That's what my gut says. We might see things differently on that.
Yeah, that's part of it. And I feel like maybe when people rise up, they also have to let go.
Yeah.
So as John Maxwell says, what are you willing to give up to go up? And some of those giving up is having to keep your finger on the pulse of everything.
Yeah.
Because in order to be an exceptional leader, be a high performance leader, what I've found is you need to learn how to delegate and trust your people and support them so that then they can keep track and then they can report to you. Because if you try to do their jobs, no, you won't be successful. You just can't, because you're not allowing yourself to level up. You're not allowing yourself that room and space to then see at that global level, to manage at that global perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a strength, to be able to delegate, to be able to know that you don't have to control it and be indispensable. I've had COOs that had a tendency to make themselves indispensable, and it put a cap on the company's growth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly. Because they put a cap on themselves, on their ability to how much, the bandwidth was basically how much bandwidth of the company was, how much bandwidth they could consume.
Exactly.
And then, of course, there's limits on that, based on how much time we have in the day. Yeah. So what other tips, if you were someone who was seeking to be a high level, high performance leader, entrepreneur, professional, what are some top tips, or just off the top of your head, you would share with them
to be a high performance leader?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. It's a really, really broad question. And I think I'm going to contradict myself here, or I'm going to present a paradox. Because earlier I said you should look at kind of what your strengths are and the strengths of the people around you. And that requires you to label them a little bit. And I talked about profiling tools, so this person might be good at making it rain on the sales side. This person is super organized, methodical, detail oriented. Maybe they're a little passive. This person's really good at negotiating. This person shuts down in the face of pressure, but they're really good at, taking care of the customer. You have all these types, these personality, and you do have to, if you're fielding a team in the manner that I have talked about, which is like showing up for a track meet. You have the sprinters, you have the long distance runners, you have the hurdles, et cetera. You win the meet by everybody doing well, but you're not all doing the same thing. There's some crossover. At the same time, here's the paradox. Some leaders that are not in high performance that I've seen have a tendency to put people in a box. And what they're doing is they're putting their personality in a box. They're not labeling them based on performance and what you can count on that person for. They're labeling them based on their personality. Oh, she's this or he's that. I don't want to use those terms and phrases, but it's kind of an ugly truth to being a leader, is that you put a label on somebody's back and then you relate to them as kind of that, and it's kind of negative in my opinion. And to be a leader, you have to me, an effective small to medium sized CEO, that's who I focus on, is you need to continue to relate to your team members as the highest version of themselves. It's kind of like a teacher having high expectations of a student. And that student might have issues, but later when they're 40 years old, they say, you know what, that coach, that teacher believed in me and called me out when I wasn't behaving in that, at that level. If you do it with kindness and compassion. And so, it's like, don't put that person in a box and make them small. They might prove you wrong again and again, but if you can't stop doing that, you should get them off your team, because you're not doing them any favors. And it breaks my heart to see when people do that. And I see it all the time, even in my own company. I see it in a lot of companies. This is how he is. This is how she is. This is how they are. And if you're not curious anymore about that person and you can't expect something new, you probably ought to escort them out the door, because they're yours. They're yours while they're on your team. It's kind of like you choose, you can have your kids and resent them, or you can choose your kids every day. This is my child. It's time for me. I need to do, So it's like your employees are your employees until they're not your employees anymore. So, and if you talk to them and they can't get it together in the way that you need them to get it together, then you can say, obviously a performance improvement plan is in order. And then they may shine doing something else. But I don't like the negative agreements that leaders sometimes have and go into, and then they expect the employees not to gossip. So they themselves are gossiping, calling it an HR conversation. I've been guilty of it. But there's not like action taken, and then you don't want the frontline employees to do that. And the other thing that I would like to see more of with leaders, besides just seeing people as their highest selves, is I would like for leaders to see the frontline workers as the thought leaders of a company. It's because they're lower on a hierarchy or on an org chart, and they aren't being compensated as much as you. They are the ones who are interacting with the clients, and you should take everything they say as like gold. I mean, that is your feedback, and believe them when they say, whatever it is. They may have a narrow or limited perspective because of the role that they're in, but it's still, you put the pieces together and you can come up with a way more accurate picture of what's happening in your company than you have sitting in your C-level office.
Yes. Very true. Very, very true.
Yeah.
As a continuous improvement change agent for many, many years in corporate, that was our gospel. You go to the front lines, you do the Gemba, as they call it in Lean Six Sigma. You go to where the work is being done, and you ask the questions. And
I was a turnaround consultant. And when I got asked by the CEO, typically it would be something like this: I want you to come and fix my team. And I would just say, okay, yeah, sure, and then just go to the front lines and work your way back. And it always rolled uphill. The issue was a lot simpler than what they thought. And they could figure it out on their own. But sometimes people talk to a consultant more bluntly than they would talk to, their own boss, especially if they've brought it up before and nothing was done about it. So,
yeah. People usually only bring up something once, maybe twice, if they're very adventurous. And if it's not taken seriously, they'll won't bring it up again.
If you're a leader and you really want to get to the bottom of something, or you have a persistent issue, you just go ask your people, what have you tried to submit? What have you tried to give us information on that we haven't listened to? And then just write down everything they say. And then the next question would be, how is that impacting your business? How is that impacting our business? And they'll tell you, and then you can see, are they right or are they inaccurate?
Mm-hmm. And I would say 80% of the time, you find your problems right there. Yeah. It's been right in front of your face the whole time, and it's been ignored the whole time. And because leaders think, oh, well, the VP of so-and-so didn't tell me this, therefore. Well,
a lot of it circles back to the leader will say, well, he or she is just having that issue because it's them. That's fine, but so work around that. That circles all the way back to the feminine way of, if you want to balance out an organization instead of running it in sort of this compartmentalized fashion, and you want to add that feminine perspective to things, you then say, okay, I get that I don't agree with his or her, opinion about what's happening, but it's their perception, it's their reality. So I'm going to organize a solution around their perception because it's real if it's real for them. Otherwise, I need to find somebody else, because they're struggling or suffering. So it's like, you want to take out all the suffering in a company, there's no way to take it all out. But if you are, especially in a service business, the happiness of the frontline employees is impacting your clients. Mm-hmm. Then you have to listen until it's painful.
All right.
Yeah.
And most leaders don't necessarily always want to hear the hard truth.
Necessarily. Guilty as charged. Yeah. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Because it's one more thing you have to deal with.
Yeah.
And your list of many things to handle.
Well, what else does your audience like to hear about? You said what makes a successful leader, or what are the tips? We've talked about building teams, and what else? Like, I've been struggling through this pandemic, sticking to my practices that make me completely present in my heart. Whether you call it a spiritual practice or yoga, meditation, whatever it is, prayer, whatever it is, like to get into your higher mind all the time. And I feel like I've had a hangover a little bit from the pandemic. Like I'm just kind of draggy. Like I'm still recovering from it,
And that's oh shoot, I should know the term because I talked about it a lot when we started the pandemic. And what it is, it's basically the social consciousness is actually impacting you, particularly if you're a higher empathy level. Mm-hmm. You're a higher empathy level individual, you will actually be physically and emotionally impacted by the mass feeling. So if there's a trauma like 9/11, for example, I cried for like 3 days. Right. I mean, I wasn't there. I watched it. It was horrible. I don't want to think about it really. Yeah. But that kind of feeling sticks with you. So whatever our social structures are feeling as a whole is impacting each individual, even if you are as disassociated with it as you can be. And I have tried to pull that plug because I need to be present for my clients.
Yeah.
I need to show up and be that source for them. And so I have disconnected as much as I can from like the Facebook and the this and the that, because it's just too much information. Mm-hmm. And more of that, I get it. My psyche, my energy gets drained from that. So we're actually feeling that impact in real time. And if we can't describe it, and particularly if it feels like it's something may not be yours, because I've had that as well. People are like, oh, I feel draggy, or I feel or I feel just like it's not normal for me to be this whatever it is. It's like, well, if it's not normal for you to be this, whatever it is, it's probably a feeling or burden that you're carrying for the masses and not necessarily for yourself. So it's important to, number one, acknowledge that. And then number two, say, okay, this burden is not mine.
Yeah. Well, thanks for
to carry.
just to acknowledge it, because I just did that on a live show with you just now. So I really need to snap out of it. I mean, it's just very subtle. I just don't have, I feel like I'm not on pause anymore, but I'm on a little bit of a slow-mo, gearing up, and, not being able to travel is a big thing for me, because travel would shake up my whole system, in a good way, in a positive way. But I haven't been on an airplane in over a year, which is crazy.
Yeah. So, my husband's the same way. He's a travel bug, and it's very different. And, acknowledging that it's something, it's an influence outside of ourselves. And it's interesting because we carry things that aren't our own. Take, for example, clients that I work with who have limits on how much success they can experience in their career. It's actually a limit that was imposed upon them because no one else in their family has ever been that far, or no one else in their family has ever had an MBA, or no one else in their family has ever. So it's these things that are actually imposed upon us, whether from our social structures, like you're feeling right now, or from our familial structures, our parental structures, for those people we've looked up to who've defined for us what is our boundaries, if you will. And it's important to challenge those periodically, particularly if it's a feeling that, it's not yours. It's not yours to carry. And then
it's really weird when you're the black sheep for being too successful.
Mm-hmm. I have actually lost friends for being a best-selling author.
Yeah. That sounds like
that happens.
Thing to say, but it's like being alienated from people in your originating circle who can't be with it. They don't know who you are anymore, et cetera. Like, you've changed.
Yeah. They don't see themselves in you. And that's important for relationships, is for someone to see a part of themselves in you. And that's how that bond is formed. And when that shifts, one person changes, rises, changes, shifts, whatever, then that connection is no longer there, and they struggle to see themselves in you. And don't take it personal. It's not, it's hard. That shift is hard. And I would have to say, like Larry Levine, who's a colleague of mine, I consider him one of my greatest network buddies. He's a sales trainer. He said, sit at the table with winners. The conversation will be very different.
It's true.
It's very true. So for this year, specifically circling back a little bit to the that we're feeling, I struggled as well. Normally, I mentioned I'm a planner. Normally over the holidays, I have my business plan. I went over last year's, did the thing, and then I planned this year's. And this year I got to a point past book launch, and it was like, I don't know. And I had this very strong feeling. There's a saying that, you sow seeds, you sow seeds, and you sow seeds, and then that crop bears fruit. Well, you also need to be present to work that crop. And if you continually just sow, and you're ignoring the crops that you've already sown, then you might be missing out on some opportunities. So I tend to be a sow. I'm like growing, next.
You have to celebrate. So in the classes that I taught, one of the things that we did was, and I've talked about it in other podcasts, is imagination activation. But when I do any kind of guided visualization for people, and they imagine their outcome that they're attempting to plant seeds for, there's always, we take them to this through this visualization, and everybody ends up in the same place. At the end of the visualization, they end up in a celebratory state. Mm-hmm. It's beyond gratitude. So we ask them, what are you seeing? And every single person that we've done it with describes describes a celebration. They talk about the scene that they're in, and they're with family or friends, and they're having a great meal, or they're doing this or that. And so celebration, in my view, is one of the highest states that you can be in, the feeling of real celebration. Yeah. And if we're always accomplishing and we're never celebrating, we're not ever going to get to that high state. So I guess the path for me has been, how do I experience being in a celebration and have, ambition and, want to accomplish or want to have purpose and, want to get things done. How do you celebrate the human condition and how life is today? And that's really a skill, and a talent that has to be cultivated. And I'm sure, I've sure got work to do, but how do we celebrate in a pandemic? I've seen people doing it.
Yeah. I mean, I have some people doing it. I know one of my colleagues, she celebrated her biggest business growth year last year. And she was able to help so many people in the process. So it's a good thing for her. And the thing about it is, in a pandemic, it's important to, one, develop the gratefulness practice so we're able to celebrate more often, because most of us have historically probably taken a lot of things for granted, or we're so caught up in the what's next or the busyness syndrome that we're not really present and we're not necessarily grateful for the smaller things. So being able to appreciate that gives us that gratitude and then leads to that more celebration. Oh gosh, I'm so happy that I'm, in Texas, warm and dry. Not freezing to death. That's one thing we can celebrate. So it's those small things and developing appreciation for them so we can be in that continual celebration state, yet still be, okay, I have the forward-looking state as well. So being able to have that seamlessly transition a little bit more. And two, I'll also say, when you're talking about big changes, it's not like a rocket ship going off. It's not this straight up thing. It never is. It's more like stairs you climb. So you feel like, oh, okay, I'm working on something, I'm marinating on something, and then you have the breakthrough. And you have the realization, the epiphany, the learning, the knowledge, and then you celebrate it, and then you kind of marinate on something for a while, and you up. So it's more of a stairs that we climb versus this rocket ship taking off into space. That would be really hard on our system.
Well, we grew up with, we had semesters and we graduated from one grade to the next, and you got your report card, and we were a little bit programmed to accomplish, and then you close that chapter. And then when you become an adult, there's hardly ever the sense that a chapter is closed. It's like, and then that can become a little bit of a grind, even if it's really like you are accomplishing. So that, circling back to setting goals with a time on them, that's one of the caveats to not having a deadline for a goal, is that there's no point in time where you declare a celebration. So anyway, so I think you have to manufacture those. If you quarterly, we made our goals, but let's celebrate not just what we met as far as goals. Let's just celebrate the fact that the office had electricity and water through the freeze last month.
All right.
Yay.
Yay!
We celebrate every, like grandparents. We give grandparents paid time off in my companies. We look for things to celebrate. So it's you do a better job, but it's really cool.
Yes. So for those of you who tuned in or tuning in later, I hope you found this illuminating, rewarding, and empowering and enlightening. I know I have. I know it's been a very fun conversation. Thank you so much, Mandy, for your time and your energy. And I loved having this time with you to not only hear your wisdom, but share and impart some great tips for people to become more high-performing leaders, professionals, and entrepreneurs. Mandy, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And for all of you tuning in, bye for now. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in on the Career Coffee Chat podcast. It's been a pleasure. Feel free to reach out to me. My email is coacheurban@gmail.com or tweet at coacheurban, Instagram coach.eurban, or reach out to my Facebook group, Elevate Your Career. So I'd love to learn more about you, hear your insights, and what questions you have. You can find out more about me at coacheurban.com. And don't forget, please do reach out on LinkedIn. You can find me at Erin Urban. Until next time, cheers. Here's to caffeinating your career.